Hey guys, what's up? I'm CJ and welcome back to my galaxy. Today it's a whole new series where I'm talking about AroAce topics and media and talking to AroAce content creators. Basically, if you don't know what aromantic asexual means, they're two separate sexualities in the queer community. Aromantic means little to no romantic attraction. Asexual means little to no sexual attraction. So they often go hand in hand. You can be aromantic and asexual, or you can be aromantic and not asexual, or say asexual and not aromantic. There are also micro labels, and it's a very extensive topic for another day. If you're interested in micro labels, there are plenty of resources. Specifically, the content creator that I am collaborating with today speaks a lot about micro labels as well. I personally am both aromantic and asexual, specifically demi-romantic, asexual. And demi-romantic is also a micro label that essentially says that I don't experience romantic attraction until I have a personal connection with a specific person. Today we're talking about AroAce Superheroes and a lot about the MCU, DC, and comic books. There are a lot of different superhero topics as well in there, but those are kind of like the main topics we're talking about. So if you're not into MCU and DC, there are some other characters we are talking about, so you don't have to miss out. But without further ado, let's get into the video.
I'm Patrick from TikTok, YouTube, Instagram. I go by FluentlyAspec.
AroAce Superheroes essentially is what the title is going to be, and everything that we think of that, because I wanted to get kind of a different perspective than just my own, being a part of the AroAce community, because I thought it'd be a great idea to essentially have more understanding about what it looks like in media for different genres. I know a lot about Marvel personally, and Florence Pugh's version of Yelena Belova. I always forget what her last name is.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, I'm anxious to see if Marvel is going to actually portray her as AroAce in the films and in the TV shows, because while I still get that vibe, there's a lot of, especially when the Hawkeye series came out, there was a lot of shipping going on between her and Kate Bishop. It was a very strong thing.
Yes.
And I mostly stayed out of it. I didn't post any replies to any of the things I saw, but in the back of my mind, I was like, but she's AroAce.
Yeah.
Like, they can be besties if you want to ship them as
definitely
platonic, queer platonic, however, but I was a little not annoyed, but just anxious to see where they take her character, because I don't know, I think we need an on-screen character from Marvel.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like there are a lot of characters that in the superhero realm that I feel like don't have love interests, but they aren't really, they're not gonna, I feel like maybe they're not gonna add them as AroAce. Like, I might headcanon them as AroAce, but like with Yelena, I feel like you can't really, and I say this with all due respect to like the gay lesbian community, I feel like a lot of the time with certain characters that you get because they ship them with because it'd be like a headcanon for a lesbian relationship, I feel like I can't say like, oh, she's actually asexual, because people think, because of their idea of what the AroAce community looks like, people think that you can't have lesbian and AroAce, when in reality you can. I think that it'd be really important to make Yelena's character AroAce, like in the comics, because she'd be really good at representation. Everyone loves Florence Pugh, so if she portrayed an asexual character, I feel like it'd be really big for the community. If she gave the tick of approval, essentially saying that the community, like, we should talk more about the community, then it'd be great representation for an actress like herself to be able to portray an AroAce character.
I completely agree. I think one of the reasons that, for me, Todd Chavez was very well written anyway, especially later in BoJack Horseman.
Yeah.
But I think the fact that Aaron Paul was such a recognizable actor already lending his voice to an Ace character, I think gave it that little bit more validity.
Yeah.
And I think Florence Pugh would do the same.
Yeah, totally. And from BoJack Horseman, because the series is also very popular, Todd is one of the like more popular characters that we go for representation, and that who we use as an explanation of who we are within the community. I think that having another one of those characters, especially if we have like the male and female characters, to say like, anyone can essentially be our ace, no matter your gender, it'd really add some more discourse and representation.
I agree. And something that I feel like Florence Pugh might be our best chance in the Marvel Universe.
Definitely.
Because I don't know that Gwenpool, and we'll probably talk about Gwenpool in a little bit, but I don't know that Gwenpool will be portrayed in the MCU anytime soon. I think she might be too new of a character. And as far as the Ant-Man franchise is concerned, unfortunately, before they announced or revealed that the Wasp is actually Ace, which very few people even know. Because
I didn't even know about that. Yeah.
Yeah, that was in last year's Pride story.
Oh, so
it was actually a Gwenpool story.
Okay.
But the character of the Wasp was revealed as Ace in that same story.
Okay. Cool.
And,
yeah.
But the catch is, it's a different Wasp than what we get in the MCU. In the MCU, we have Hope Van Dyne, who's supposed to be like the MCU's version, but in the comics, it's Nadia Van Dyne. And she's got a whole different backstory where she was actually just like Yelena and Natasha, she was part of the Black Widows.
Oh, interesting. So there's more crossover
so she
there.
has a whole... Yeah, she has a really interesting backstory. And she's also, like Gwenpool, she's much younger than Hope was in the movies.
Yeah.
So she would be like a Kate Bishop age as well.
Yeah.
So it's not likely that they'd ever be able to use her at this point because they already went a completely different direction with Wasp.
Yeah, and and even though you can have AroAce characters who are in relationships, it's not often portrayed in media as such, and it doesn't seem like it'd happen, or it has a chance of happening right now, because Hope is in a relationship with Ant-Man. I think it'd be really interesting to see, like, from the comics, it sounds like it's the characters who are in, what is it called, the Black Widow program or something?
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah. The Russians, essentially. Yeah, and because they technically can't have kids, they can't have the typical romances. I know that with Black Widow herself, the character, she talks about having it being difficult for her to be in relationships, and I think because we already have that sort of difficulty with the relationships with Black Widow in the past, that it'd be easier to introduce asexuality into it because of the stereotypes. It's into media, whilst unfortunate that we are very stereotyped, it is easier for a transition in that way.
It's interesting you brought that up, though, because we did very briefly have a mainstream live-action superhero in DC. In Legends of Tomorrow, we had Spooner, who was... she had been captured by aliens.
Okay, yeah.
And they had freed her from the aliens. I forget the exact storyline. But she joined the team of the Legends on the show Legends of Tomorrow. And it was in the 7th season, which unfortunately very abruptly ended up being their final season, that she came out as Ace. And it was another character that actually told her, well, you might actually be Ace, because they played like a game of F, Marry, Kill, whatever.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And they did that, or she did that with their other team members. And Spooner was like, I don't really see them that way. Okay, well, how about the three girls then, goes through the three.
Yeah.
And she's like, I don't get those feelings for any of them either. And then what I think was one of the most authentic on-screen relatable moments for an Ace character to come out, she then said, maybe that's just one of those things that the aliens screwed up about me. And that was almost like, to me, her maybe I'm just broken moment.
Yeah, and you get that a lot. Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like I have yet to meet an Ace that hasn't gone through that stage. I'm sure there are some that never thought of themselves that way, but unfortunately that is a pretty common part of the journey.
Definitely. Yeah, I definitely personally experienced that as well. Maybe in like the younger generation, they'll stop experiencing it now that it's become a more popular sexuality, well-known sexuality.
Thankfully, that was immediately followed up with a very like calm and supportive, no, you might just be Ace.
Yeah.
And then the other character explains to her what that is, and Spooner goes, I guess that makes me Ace then.
Yeah.
And it was very wrapped up in like a 2-minute clip, but she had that moment, and then thankfully she had somebody supportive to help her. Not everybody, unfortunately, in the Ace community is going to have somebody right there with them to help them through that stage.
Yeah.
But it was nice to see that recognition that if somebody knows it, they can help explain it, because I know a lot of people, myself included, when we first heard what it is, we didn't have that. And in my case, I actually heard about it from somebody that didn't want me to be.
Yeah.
So it was the opposite. I had this person wanted to be with me and said, well, then if you don't get those things, then you're Ace and we can't be together. That was a completely different situation for me, but unfortunately they ended up canceling the show and we didn't get to see her explore that any further.
For people watching, it'd be a good way to be introduced to the asexual community, and that it is possible to have that kind of support with like when I found out I was asexual, I figured out I was asexual, and then I figured out I was aromantic something like 2 years after, I think. And I feel like my introduction to the community was very similar to what you described, because I was just sitting in a random conversation, and I just and I was like, oh, what's asexual? And they were describing it, and I was like, hang on a minute, does everyone not feel like that? And then they described what asexuality was for me, and I was like, whoa, okay. That suddenly it's so much clearer what I feel, and I feel like it might slowly be becoming more common to have that sort of experience, that you have people finding out about it, and then the person who's AroAce themselves doesn't know that their friends are actually the ones to tell them, which is good to be represented in media in such a way. So.
I have a couple of visual aids. I've got
love that. Yeah.
Connor right here. This is actually the Ace Flag edition of Robin number
cool.
15.
Yeah.
I went to like 4 different comic book stores to find this one, and it was the only one they had.
Oh. Wow.
But I want to get it framed at some point. And then of course our girl Gwenpool.
We love that. Yeah.
So Gwenpool and Connor kind of had different reactions, and in both cases we actually got like a secret extra Ace out of it. Like I mentioned with Gwenpool, in the story that followed her actual coming out, we also then found out that Wasp is Ace through her, because she was trying to she was trying to set up a LGBTQ plus like pride bash at her university.
Cool, yeah.
So she was trying to recruit other people to help her, and so she reached out to Wasp, who she knew was also Ace. And that's how we as the readers found out.
Yeah, that's interesting. I did a quick Google search when you mentioned it when we were talking before recording, what it was. And I found that a lot of people reject the idea of Gwenpool, or at least not reject, ignore it, because it's easier to just look at the superhero storyline. But it's really good when you get introduced, like, whilst the characters know what their sexualities are, we as readers might not know, and I think it's really interesting that there are superheroes right now that we have in live action as well as comics that have certain sexualities and we just don't know yet as readers, which would give more opportunity for directors and producers to introduce the characters that, hey, maybe that they knew this entire time that this was their sexuality, and it gives them like a gateway into introducing it.
With Gwenpool's story, it wasn't rushed, and I think that's one of the reasons that I loved how they did it. They took their time. I think it was 5 or 6 issues to tell her coming out, whereas with Connor, all it was a snip, like 5 pages in the Pride anthology, which was still a good story, but also because Connor's been around since the, I think, early 90s, he got a lot more rejected by the general fan base than Gwenpool did. His is a little trickier because Connor's story, part of his story was that he trained with monks, and he took a vow of celibacy. And so one of the arguments against Connor being Ace that I saw was, well, that just makes his vow not important, because people just assume asexuality means celibacy.
Yeah, when it definitely doesn't mean that. It means so much more, and when did the Gwenpool one come out?
Gwenpool was about a year ago now.
Okay, so she's
around a year ago.
Super recent.
But the character's been around since, I think, 2016. So the character in general is still very new.
Yeah, so she was definitely around the time when asexuality, being AroAce, was far more well known than it was for Connor Hawke. I've heard things that maybe, like, people had words for being AroAce back in the 90s, but it wasn't something that was known as a label quite yet. It was more about being like gay, lesbian back then. So I can definitely see why it was different representation than Gwenpool, but it's really interesting to see the progression between Connor Hawke and Gwenpool, whilst different franchises. It's definitely it shows the time period that it was and what the general feedback was for it.
I think if I've learned anything from just observing how the two brands have handled asexuality, DC has been quicker.
Okay, yeah.
They've been on it faster, but Marvel takes their time and does it carefully.
Yeah.
Would be my critique.
Yeah, with Marvel, I find that it's progressed now now that we have Disney owning the MCU and adapting from the comics. They're going for the diversity card, whilst sometimes can come across as lazy. It is good representation as it progresses, and they just knocked my microphone. As it progresses and they learn more, that they're slower, but they have opportunity to hear feedback and then go about it a bit differently and progress the character as they introduce them.
Yeah. I know, like I said, Spooner was the first Ace superhero in either one on screen. Yes. Marvel has yet to catch them on that, but again, it was I wouldn't call it a throwaway scene because it meant a lot to me.
Definitely, yeah.
But it was a short scene. And then it never got the chance to be explored more. With Connor Hawke, again, very short coming out story. And then I know he had another story this past year that was a co-story with Tim Drake, but I didn't get a chance to read it yet. But just very quick, get it through. This is, and then with Gwenpool, she had that beautiful 5-piece story with an immediate follow-up in the Pride anthology, where we also, not so subtly, but very welcomely learned about Wasp as well.
Yeah.
Which also felt like it took its time and was careful of how are we going to address this. With DC, in that same issue that Connor comes out, again, they were first to it, and Marvel hasn't got a demisexual character yet, but we had a demisexual drop right there, if you can even read it. That's it. That Brainiac 5 is demisexual. That little box is to my knowledge, all we've ever seen of that reveal. So all it does is reveal that Brainiac 5 is demisexual. Yeah. There's a series of what appear to be Instagram posts, though they don't use the Instagram logo. And it's different heroes at the Pride Festival. Dreamer, who is a part of the Arrowverse and is a trans character introduced as such, is one of the pictures. Dawnstar, who's a bi character.
Yeah.
And then between the two of them is Brainiac 5, and all it says, hey, is that demisexual B5 taking in one of history's earliest Pride celebrations? #Pride, #Pride 2022. And that's all we got.
I mean, it's short.
It's literally a little box.
Yeah.
But again, Marvel hasn't had anything outside of just asexual. They haven't dove into any further labels, whereas DC did it in 2022 already.
Yeah, so definitely, yeah.
Yeah. DC does it first, but Marvel does it more. They take their time more.
It's great that it has micro labels with DC because it's really important to say, like for people who feel like they aren't just completely AroAce, that it's important for representation like that to happen, that they put like demisexual in there. And DC seems like it's doing great. I don't know a lot about DC, but they've got the micro labels in there, and Marvel doesn't yet. So Marvel, do better.
But then on the flip side, Marvel has an AroAce character. I don't know that DC has anyone that's Arrow yet.
From my research, they have they're both, but they lean more towards asexuality. So yeah, they don't talk a lot about being aromantic.
I did a quick Google search.
Yeah.
Tremor, and actually I do remember seeing this. Tremor is AroAce, and that's a character on DC.
Okay.
But it's not a big character.
It's some representation, although we don't want to be getting little bits. We want them to just dive into the deep end so we can have the representation.
It's at least comforting to know that aromantic is on DC's radar.
Yes, so it has a chance in the future to have that sort of thing and see more aromantic characters in the future.
I think one thing that really disappoints me about Legends of Tomorrow being canceled when it was is that Spooner was really comfortable just being herself.
Yeah.
And she wasn't very hypersexualized in a way that she didn't control the narrative.
Yeah.
She completely controlled her narrative. There's actually an episode where, and I think this gets at this might be the best thing that they did with her character, having it directly follow up her finding out that she's Ace was the very next episode. They were all trapped on this game show. And to get at everybody, she was like, I'm just going to make everybody super uncomfortable and walk around naked.
I mean, that's
so she
one
did
way.
that the whole episode, but very confidently and just like, yeah, what are you going to do about it? And coming from the previous episode, she finds out she's Ace, and now she's taking that sort of approach. To me, was like, that's almost more empowering than if they had just done it without the previous episode.
Yeah.
If they just had that without knowing that she's Ace, or even if they'd done them out of those episodes the other way around, I wonder if it would have felt as empowering.
I just imagine it could have been taken very differently. That when it comes to nudity, people take it especially in Hollywood. I think it's very different outside of the US, but in the way how they take nudity in film. But it could have been sexualized otherwise. If it would have been a different type of empowerment instead.
So that episode where she is like, I'm just going to be naked and make everyone uncomfortable, was the episode right before she found out she was Ace. But again, I don't think that takes away from it at all.
Yeah.
Especially looking back on that episode and being like, oh, that was actually, good for her. Yeah.
It's good to see representation in that sense, that she's just being herself. It just tells us that we can be whatever we want. We can do whatever we want and maybe have a bit of a laugh because people are uncomfortable.
Yeah. It reminds me a lot of how people treat Yasmin Benoit.
Oh, yeah. I see that all the time.
And like, I see that comparison in, like, she's not trying to make anybody uncomfortable like Spooner is. She's just being her.
Yeah.
And people have a serious problem with that. But then just let her be her.
Yeah, and it's not even necessarily connected either. It's just the fact that they happen to come hand in hand with Yasmin Benoit and this character. And
there's others too, but she gets it
so
disgusts me, the things people say to her. It's awful.
Yeah, I open her social media sometimes and just see like the onslaught of how people treat her, and I'm like, it's some of the worst parts of the discrimination we get is this like hypersexualization, saying like you can't have the best of both worlds, when in fact we can and we should be able to have that. And that's something that Yasmin Benoit, I hate that she has to deal with it, but she is doing so well with that and dealing with it so well.
And you kind of talked also about the Black Widows.
Yeah, with Erasure, the people maybe didn't take it too well within fandoms, and especially at the time back in the 90s. And then if you look at like differences with the Black Widows, and I think my point was with the Black Widows that they weren't, that I think it's easy representation to flow into as well, since that they're seen generally, whilst sexual in at least the MCU, I'm not sure what it looks like in the comics, that they might be sexual, but at the same time, Black Widow, Nat, talked a lot about relationships in there, and it's easy representation, but fandoms might not take it that way. And I think a lot of the time when it comes to the franchises giving us representation is how the fandom reacts as well.
I agree. Yeah, with, like you said, the Black Widows, part of their treatment, so to speak, which obviously was not good treatment whatsoever, but they had their organs removed.
Yes.
So, like you said, if you're going to explain asexuality, I mean, you could take that route, and Marvel certainly has with a couple of their characters. But it also lends to more of the stereotypes. As for Connor Hawke, as I said earlier, one of the reasons that people were upset about Connor Hawke being Ace was because he's a character that had been established back in the 90s, and during his story, he had spent time training with monks and taken a vow of celibacy. So when all of a sudden 2022, he's revealed to be asexual, all of a sudden to people who don't understand what asexuality is, but not maybe so much to people who are familiar with it, that was the big backlash was, well, this nullifies his vow of celibacy. It makes it meaningless because he's Ace. He wouldn't have had sex to begin with. Well, no, that's not how it works. You know, I've made many videos about this. Celibacy and asexuality are not the same thing, and people don't understand that.
Yeah. I think that's one of the biggest issues within the asexual community specifically, and less the aromantic community, although it sometimes factors in. The asexual community is that people won't understand the representation because they have been introduced to the asexual community with stereotypes or the wrong representation, and that because superheroes, everyone wants to be a superhero, or at least growing up, it's they looking at representation with the AroAce community is that fandoms might not, it'll shock them in a way. If you're not AroAce and you're not in the community, don't know a lot about it, it might shock them, and it might, people have to like rewrite in their head, like maybe they don't see themselves in the characters anymore, or that you can still see yourself in the character outside the community, that you're allowed to see yourself in that character still. But it doesn't take away from who the character is either.
And I think one thing that Stan Lee has been noted as saying was, the Spider-Man suit wasn't exactly intended the way that it became, but one of the happiest coincidences of it was that any kid could see themselves in that suit.
Yeah.
Any person deserves to see themselves in superheroes.
Yeah, definitely. And that just because, even if the character specifically doesn't wear a mask, they can still see themselves in the superhero. The whole thing about superheroes is that you're not supposed to reveal your identity. So knowing their identity, it adds to the character and the representation, but it also shouldn't take away from people being able to see themselves in the superhero. It just should add to their understanding of what it is and who could be behind the mask. Fandoms, it can really add to the representation, or take away from it. It's good to have representation, and fandoms, when they accept the community, it definitely helps show the franchises or the companies that own the franchise that, hey, we want to see more of this.
One of the ironies, I know we've talked about Gwenpool already quite a bit, but one thing that makes her comic special beyond her being AroAce is how she understands how comic books work. And so she's aware that she's in a comic. She's aware that she has to remain popular and get her comic to sell. And that's actually what keeps her alive. And I think that really speaks to exactly what you were just saying, is if the fandoms accept it and the big companies see that it's the representation that we want as consumers.
Yes.
I hate for it to be a consumer thing, but it is.
Yeah, if we don't consume that sort of media, then they're not going to make it. So we just have to continue saying, hey, we do want this representation. And with Gwenpool, with her powers, it means that it's essentially saying that we do want this representation. I would say with Gwenpool that, hey, if we're buying this comic, if we're reading this comic about her, then that means, yeah, we do want AroAce representation, because it's what keeps her character alive.
Like, quite literally.
Yeah, literally, very much, yeah. Who do you headcanon as? I know I have a couple of them. Who would you headcanon?
I've got a few. My top one that I've never seen anyone else bring up is actually from a manga.
Okay.
Yuno from Black Clover is my top headcanon for AroAce. So both in the manga and heavily in the anime, he is constantly being chased by numerous female characters.
Okay, yeah.
He could not care less.
Okay, yeah, I see that.
All he cares about is his competition with his foster brother over who's going to become the next Wizard King. And he's hyper focused on that, to the point, it's not that even that he's oblivious either, because he clearly knows that these other female characters are like after him.
Yeah.
He just doesn't care. And it's great.
Complete different focus. It's just like not in his mind that he should be going after one of these potential suitors. You know,
right. Yeah. And I think he would actually work really well as representation, because one of the stereotypes is obliviousness. He's not oblivious at all. He knows and understands. Yeah. It just doesn't matter to him.
If you do it right, then it'd be breaking away from it. Like, you'd start with a stereotype and then move into how he breaks away from that and subverts expectations. One of mine, just because he doesn't have a love interest, and I think it'd be really good to just not give him a specific love interest, Shang-Chi in his literal own film, Shang-Chi, the only love interest I see, I don't remember their names, sorry, but the sister and the best friend, I know that a lot of people headcanon them as together, and I believe, I might be wrong, but one of them might be pansexual, maybe the sister, in the comics.
Okay.
Unless I took a headcanon as fact, that could also be what happened, but I like the idea of the side characters being in a relationship and then getting the main character being asexual and not, or aromantic. I think it'd be more aromantic than asexual, that he doesn't have this love interest. So why give him one just for the sake of giving him one, when you could just easily put that representation in there? Not that they'd do it easily, but I think it'd just be a really good idea to not put him with the best friend. That would be so frustrating if they did that. But I love the idea of making him asexual as a headcanon in Marvel,
So my other one is the New 52 version of Wally West, which was not very popular at first, because New 52, when DC did that whole storyline, they reset a lot of things.
Yeah.
And one of the big ones was the redheaded Kid Flash that we always knew was now gone, and suddenly we had Iris's nephew, Wally, and a lot of people rejected him because the character was black.
Okay, yeah.
But me personally, I loved the character.
Yeah.
I thought he was a great addition. And he is actually the one that they kind of modeled Wally after in the Flash TV show. But now both Wally Wests exist, but now the New 52 Wally has a new nickname, because Wally is short for Wallace. Now they call him Ace West.
Yeah.
I just feel like we need him.
Yeah, I
feel like we need him.
After the nickname, like, you have to add it.
Yep.
Yeah, you have to do it at this point. I mean, that'd be great rep as well. If anyone who has Ace or Arrow somewhere in their name, I feel like you'd have to add them. It'd have to be a headcanon. Give us the good representation at this point. You may as well.
Yeah. Yes. And I love The Flash. I love the Flash TV show. I love the Flash comics. So to have a Flash family member be an Ace character would be actually really awesome.
Yeah.
Especially if that ends up being the one that they decide, we're going to make him AroAce.
Yes.
Because I would like to see a male AroAce character in comics.
I think as well with headcanons, it'd be good to separate the two. Have an aromantic but not asexual character, have asexual but not aromantic character.
Yes.
And like I said, Shang-Chi would be good as, I reckon, an aromantic character, not in a romantic relationship, and maybe not asexual, just aromantic. You know, obviously, because it's not canon yet, Florence Pugh's Yelena Belova would be good. I guess at the moment it'd still be a headcanon because it's not technically canon in the MCU, whilst canon in the comics. Anyone without a love interest in any superhero movies, I know that I have headcanons in, like, throughout Disney. Like, I think Moana would be one as well, without superheroes, as well, is a good example of being without a love interest.
Yeah. And I think that one thing that, if I'm looking for a romantic representation and without a character being Ace, I'd really want them to be careful how they handle the character, because Definitely. I feel like a lot of these big houses like Marvel and DC would feel tempted to make the character scandalous in some way. Make them Arrow but not Ace.
Yeah.
I feel like that they would have a proclivity to make that character more of a scandalous type of character.
Yeah, they can definitely handle the representation wrong. They might not even say the label specifically, and it could be taken completely in a different direction if you make them Arrow but not asexual. It can flow very easily into stereotypes or harmful stereotypes for people who are aromantic, because you can make them very sexual but without the romantic relationships. With scandalous, they can be a bit of a player, but that's not necessarily what aromantic people are. They just don't have that romantic relationship, or they could have a relationship, it's just a platonic or queer platonic relationship. I think that's also something we're missing, that I would love to see a queer platonic relationship, or a canonized queer platonic relationship where they aren't just where they're not just companions per se. They're actually together, even married, if you want to go that far as well.
Yeah, I agree. I think that would be great.
I think that would be a good way to flow into perfect media representation as well, and how possible it is.
I think it's possible. Maybe not right away.
Yeah.
And I hate to admit that.
Yeah.
But I think right now at this moment, there's still such a strong misunderstanding of what asexuality and aromantic mean as it is. And I think that part of the problem is that a lot of the, like you said, the writers, the executives, also don't understand it.
Yeah.
One great thing about both Connor Hawke and Gwenpool, their coming out stories were written by entirely Ace teams. But are you going to have the Ace team on every Ace character? Because comic books also change writers very frequently.
Oh,
You'll
yeah,
get
definitely.
one writer for a Batman comic for 6 issues, and then they're out, and somebody else has to come in and take over.
Yeah.
And if that were to happen, would the Ace story or the Arrow story or the Arrow Ace story be intact as a part of that character's identity? It's hard to say.
I think they do that with media, films and stuff as well, because you have since the writers' strike and the actors' strike, they don't have, they're only just putting back showrunners. Some of the film studios didn't have showrunners for all of them, and those teams frequently change anyway. So having at least one person would be great, but at the same time, it's not entirely possible to have an entire full team of AroAce writers in the room, and because they change so often, and even then it doesn't necessarily mean they're going to be hired in the first place, because we're far and few between within the entertainment industry. At least we're here, but we're not as much in the media as we'd like to be. The executives don't really understand. I think it's often referred to as, I hear a lot that like we're more well known in the past 5 years, so that's not very much time compared to the rest, like a lot of other communities like gay, lesbian, bi, like they've been around, like we've known about gay people since like the 20th century, and the label's been known and not necessarily accepted, but we understand what it is. Compared to being AroAce, we still have a long way to go to catch up with how long it's been for the other communities. It's going to be at least like another decade until we catch up within the film industry. Perfect representation for me would be just to have not every superhero having like the damsel in distress, the love interest, and have the ones that don't have love interests, it doesn't have to be all of them, but to have them have micro labels and to be aromantic but not asexual, and have those characters that explicitly state it as well, and we don't have those stereotypes. But yet again, the only way the executives know about us is with stereotypes, if they know about us.
Yeah, and I hate to say that we might see another case like Jughead. We haven't even talked about Jughead.
Jughead, yeah.
And Riverdale, where it was just completely erased.
Yeah.
I really hope that was the last time we see that.
Yeah.
But I'm not entirely optimistic.
Yeah. With Jughead, it's so disappointing that he was completely erased as AroAce as well, because Cole Sprouse has even said that he prepared to play that character as AroAce, and then at the end they played them, they were in a quad, and whilst like polyamory is also important representation, it felt like in the way that they played polyamory out, they could have had the best of both worlds, but they didn't understand an AroAce character and how to put that representation in, even though they had the actor, when adapted, who said like, hey, I want to play this character like this, and then they still didn't write it in.
And the irony is, I mean, I talked about Spooner on Legends of Tomorrow. That was on the same network.
Yeah.
They were on the same network, and they got one right,
and then one wrong.
But then canceled the show, and couldn't do the other one right at all.
Yeah. Like it's like they almost get there. They know about it, it's on their radar, but then they're like, well, what's the point of putting them in? Like, there's so many points as to why you'd put them in and why you need to adapt them properly, and then they still don't do it. And that's why it feels like that we might end up with another Jughead Jones sort of situation. Even though we hope that it wouldn't.
So, I think the thing that's most frustrating, because they already had Spooner, they couldn't even properly use the argument, our network's audience won't know this word.
Yeah.
Because you've already done it.
Yeah, definitely.
So I don't know.
Yeah, it's frustrating, to say the least. And even then, people have access to Google, and they can easily go and look it up. You can add a line in there as well, where you can just say, hey, this is what it means to be AroAce. Or you can, if you don't even want to say the label, you can say that the character doesn't, I think they've done it in a kid's show, DuckTales. One of the characters is canonically AroAce because they don't have like the romantic feelings. Or I think they're aromantic because they don't, it's a kid show, you don't want to make kid shows sexual, but they're aromantic, they don't have romantic feelings. It's one of the triplets in DuckTales. They explain it without the label. They just say, I don't like dating, I'm not into people like that. And it's so easy to put just without the label in there, I don't like dating. With Jughead, it could have just been like, not really interested in people like that.
And I think there's been other shows that in Steven Universe, Crystal Gems, I think.
Okay.
The group that like adopt him, sort of.
Yeah.
I don't know, his dad's like in the picture or whatever. I don't really remember how that all worked out, but I think the name is Peridot. Is supposed to be aromantic as well, and that's again, kids show, and how they can get that right in a kids show, but then something for teenagers like Riverdale, where newsflash, teens know about queer labels.
Yeah, and they know how to use Google as well.
Yeah.
And it's becoming more acceptable as well to come out as queer in high school. So it's not like people aren't aware that being queer exists, and that if you don't know a label, you should be looking it up.
I've been reading the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers comic from Boom Studios.
Yeah.
And just knowing where her character winds up later on as a parent in the main canon, I would say the Yellow Ranger Trini would be a good aromantic headcanon, because she only had one episode in the original series where she had like a crush on someone.
Yeah.
That you could argue, well, maybe that was actually not romantic feelings. We don't know. But we do know she winds up having a daughter. Okay, we never know who the father is.
Interesting.
I mean, maybe.
Yeah, you could.
She could absolutely have been aromantic, but allosexual.
Yeah, definitely. But also then, if she has some sort of romantic feelings as well, it means maybe she could have a microlabel as well. That could be a really good representation for a microlabel.
Yeah, she could be demi-romantic or anywhere on the aromantic spectrum for that matter.
Thank you so much for talking to me for this.
Yeah, this was fun.
This series, first episode of what hopefully will become a series. It was great to hear your perspective as well on it, and like I listen to a lot of like MCU and DC for film, but I don't read the comics as much, which I definitely should for all of the representation you talked about today, and I'd highly recommend people watching also have a look at the comics.
Thank you for doing this. This was a lot of fun.
Alright guys, that is the end of the video. If you enjoyed the series, please let me know in the comments by liking in the comments and like and subscribe, because it lets me know that I can continue the series and you guys will enjoy that series, and I can discuss with different content creators different media topics. And thanks again to Patrick from FluentlyAspec. It was great talking to him, and hopefully you guys enjoyed hearing his perspective as well. Once again, I hope you guys enjoyed this video, but I've been CJ, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye!